Welcome back, Lit Nerds. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're going to be taking a look at Emily Dickinson, and in particular, one of her most famous poems, Wild Nights and Wild Nights.
It is amazing how a poet, often associated with solitude and the 19th century, can continue to capture our imaginations in the 21st century.
Right,
Well,
particularly in some really unexpected places.
yeah.
So we're diving into Dickinson today, specifically because of your interest in that recent Dreamlarking music video
Oh, yeah.
with steampunk anime,
Yeah, yeah.
automatons, a Cthulhu-esque kaiju.
It's wild.
It's wild. It really does a good job of capturing that feeling of heightened expectation that you find in Dickinson's poem.
It does, yeah. And both the video and the poem, I think, really speak to this longing for connection, this desire that kind of pushes against those societal norms, and just seeks something more, something wilder.
Yeah. And speaking of wild nights, let's jump right into the poem itself.
Okay.
This thing is short but potent,
Mm-hmm.
like a shot of espresso for the soul. I mean, just that opening line, wild nights, wild nights. The repetition, those exclamation points, it just throws you right into the heart of the speaker's longing.
Yeah, it really does pull you in right away. And it's interesting because the speaker isn't just longing for any connection, right? There's this real sense of rebellion, of throwing off the constraints of convention. You see that in his lines, done with the compass, done with the chart.
Yeah, it's like the speaker saying, forget the safe route, I'm sailing into uncharted waters.
Mm.
But it's not just about reckless abandon either, right?
Right.
There's also that image of rowing in Eden, which suggests a destination, a place of blissful union.
Absolutely. That's where I think we get to the central paradox of the poem, right? There's this yearning for unrestrained passion, but at the same time, this desire for a safe harbor,
Yeah.
a place to kind of moor within that
You're
intensity.
more in that intensity, yeah.
This tension between wildness and that desire for connection, for belonging, I think that's something a lot of us can relate to even today.
Absolutely. So much is packed into just these three stanzas.
Now, Dickinson's reclusive lifestyle really fueled a lot of speculation about her personal life and what inspired her poetry.
Mhm.
Do you think Wild Nights gives us any clues about her own experiences?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, scholars have been debating this for decades. The beauty of Wild Nights is that it can be interpreted in so many different ways. Is it a longing for spiritual union? Is it a passionate expression of romantic love? Or even, maybe a coded challenge to those rigid gender roles of her time? Dickinson's own life remains shrouded in a bit of mystery, which just adds another layer to our interpretations.
It's fascinating how that mystery only seems to amplify her appeal even now. And speaking of her enduring appeal, Dickinson seems to be having a renaissance in modern media and music.
She really is. It's like her work has found this whole new life in the 21st century. Take the film A Quiet Passion, for instance.
Yeah.
It's a very somber, historically grounded portrayal of Dickinson, and it really highlights her internal struggles amidst the constraints of her time.
And then you have the Apple TV Plus series Dickinson, which takes a totally different approach, right?
Completely different.
It's playful, anachronistic, almost irreverent in a way. It portrays her as this rebellious, quick-witted young woman kind of chafing against those societal expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Two completely different interpretations, but they both manage to capture something essential about Dickinson.
Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder why now? Why is Dickinson experiencing this surge in popularity in the 21st century?
It's a great question. I think part of it has to do with the universality of her themes. Love, loss, that search for meaning, that desire to break free from societal constraints. Those are timeless human experiences that resonate across generations.
Yeah, it's true. In a world that feels, increasingly chaotic and uncertain, her work offers us this space for introspection, for grappling with those big questions of life and death.
Precisely. And, I think that's perhaps why her work has found such a strong resonance within the goth subculture.
Okay, now that's a connection I'm really curious about. On the surface, you wouldn't necessarily associate a reclusive 19th century poet with a subculture known for its dark aesthetics and dramatic sensibilities.
Right.
So what is it about Dickinson that appeals to the goth community?
Well, remember those themes we discussed earlier? That fascination with death and mortality, those shadowy corners of the human experience, those feelings of isolation and longing?
Yeah.
Those resonate deeply with the goth aesthetic.
It's funny you mention that because I remember when I first read Wild Nights, I was struck by how it could almost be interpreted as a Gothic love poem.
Oh, yeah.
That line about being done with the compass, done with the chart.
Right.
It's like a declaration of embracing the darkness, the unknown.
That's a really interesting take on it, and I think that's what makes Dickinson so compelling, you know? She takes these seemingly simple poems, and within them, you find these layers of meaning, these echoes of something much deeper, something that speaks to the complexities of the human psyche.
It's like she's giving voice to those feelings and experiences that we often shy away from.
Yeah.
Those dark and beautiful aspects of ourselves that we might not always acknowledge.
Exactly. And that's why I think she's so appealing to those who identify with the goth subculture.
Yeah.
You know, it's about finding beauty and meaning in the shadows,
Yeah.
in the things that most people might consider morbid or taboo.
It's about embracing the unconventional, about questioning the norms, about celebrating the things that make you different.
And Dickinson, in her own quiet, unconventional way, embodied all of those things.
Absolutely. Now, before we go full-on goth,
Right.
let's zoom out a bit and consider the broader context of Dickinson's life.
Okay.
She was writing during the Victorian era, a period marked by both intense societal constraints
Yes.
and an undercurrent of rebellious artistic expression.
Yes. The Victorian era is so fascinating when you think about it. You have this rapidly changing world, industrialization, scientific advancements, yet also this very strict social code, particularly for women.
It was a time of contradictions, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
And Dickinson, writing from within that complex environment, both reflected and challenged the norms of her time.
Precisely. And that's what makes her work so rich and multi-layered.
Okay, so we've got this really fascinating mix here. Dickinson's powerful poetry, her mysterious life, the influence of the Victorian era, and this unexpected connection to the goth subculture. Seems like there's a lot to unpack here.
There certainly is, and we've only just scratched the surface.
So stay tuned, Lit Nerds. We'll be right back to explore these connections further, delving deeper into the impact of Emily Dickinson's work on modern culture.
Welcome back, Lit Nerds. Ready to go a little deeper into the world of Emily Dickinson?
Absolutely. You know, I'm especially curious about those themes in her work.
Okay.
You know, particularly those ideas of rebellion and desire that we talked about earlier, and how those connect to her Victorian context, and also her surprising resonance in modern times.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you mentioned rebellion because one of the most striking aspects of Dickinson's poetry, I think, is how she uses language to break free from convention.
Right.
I mean, her poems are just full of dashes, unconventional capitalization.
Yeah.
These sudden, almost jarring shifts in thought. It's almost like she's creating her own grammar, her own set of rules.
Right. It's definitely not your typical straightforward poetry.
Yeah.
You know, when I first started reading Dickinson, I'll admit those dashes really threw me off.
Oh, yeah.
It's like she's pausing, hesitating, almost daring you to keep up with her train of thought.
It really is. And, you know, those dashes, they aren't just random punctuation marks. They serve a very specific purpose.
Right.
They create these moments of silence, of reflection, almost like she's inviting you to pause and contemplate the words.
Yeah.
To let them sink in.
So it's not just about what she's saying, but how she's saying it.
Exactly.
The form of the poem becomes as important as the content.
Precisely. And then you have the unconventional capitalization, which again, it's not random.
Yeah.
She's using it as a way of emphasizing certain words, giving them extra weight, and forcing you to pay attention. It's like she's highlighting the key ideas, the things she really wants you to focus on.
It's like she's playing with language,
Yes.
bending it to her will, almost like a sculptor molding clay.
That's a great analogy. And then you have those sudden shifts in thought. Those moments where the poem just seems to jump from one idea to another, almost like a stream of consciousness. They further disrupt expectations.
Right. You can feel disorienting at times.
Yeah.
But then you
Right.
realize that's how our minds actually work, right?
Right.
Thoughts and feelings don't always follow a linear path.
Yo.
They swirl and collide.
Yeah,
And Dickinson's poetry really captures that beautiful chaos.
absolutely. And, you know, I think that ties into another really fascinating aspect of her work, which is her exploration of the self, that inner world of thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, Dickinson was a master of introspection, wasn't she?
She was.
I mean, considering she lived such a secluded life, it makes sense that she spent a lot of time in her own head,
Right.
exploring her own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, and those inner explorations, they find their way into her poetry, often through this intense, vivid imagery. You know, remember that line from Wild Nights, rowing in Eden, ah, the sea, might I but more tonight in thee.
Oh, yeah.
That image of the sea, that yearning to more, it speaks to this deep desire for connection, but also this fear of being overwhelmed, of losing oneself.
It's almost like she's using the vastness of the sea
Mhm.
as a metaphor for the depth and intensity of her own emotions.
Exactly. And that's what makes her work so timeless and relatable. These feelings of longing,
Yeah.
of searching for connection, of grappling with the complexities of the human heart.
Hmm.
Those are things that transcend time and place.
Absolutely. And speaking of transcending time, one of the themes that keeps coming up in Dickinson's work, and one that we touched on earlier,
Yeah.
is this exploration of death and mortality. But it's not just about death as an ending, is it?
No, not at all. She's not afraid to confront death head on, but I think she's more interested in what death reveals about life. It's almost like she's using death as a lens to examine the preciousness of life, the fleeting nature of time, the intensity of our experiences.
And she does it with such a unique voice, this
Yeah.
blend of wit, darkness, and this almost childlike wonder. I mean, remember that line from one of her poems? Because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me.
Oh, I love that one.
It's so chilling, yet playful at the same time.
I know. It's like she's personifying death, turning it into a character in her own personal drama.
Yeah.
It's almost whimsical, but with this underlying current of existential dread.
Exactly. She's playing with our expectations, turning the traditional view of death on its head. And in doing so, she's inviting us to think about death in a new way.
Yeah.
To see it not just as an ending, but as a transformation.
It's like she's saying, death is a part of life, so let's not shy away from it.
Right.
Let's explore it, understand it, even find beauty in it. And, that's a perspective that aligns surprisingly well with the goth subculture,
Yes.
which we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. The goth movement, with its fascination with the macabre and the darker aspects of human existence, they really find a kindred spirit in Dickinson. It's not about glorifying death, but about acknowledging its presence, its power, and its potential to illuminate the beauty and fragility of life.
And that brings us back to the idea of Dickinson as a rebel, a woman who dared to challenge the norms of her time, both in her life and her work.
Yes.
I mean, in the Victorian era, women were expected to be demure, domestic, and to shy away from intellectual pursuits.
Right.
Yet here's Dickinson writing these passionate, challenging, and often unconventional poems that explore the full spectrum of human emotion.
Right. And her exploration of love and desire, especially from a female perspective, was particularly revolutionary for her time.
Yeah.
Remember those lines from Wild Nights? Futile in the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a bold declaration of independence,
It is.
a rejection of those prescribed paths laid out for women in the 19th century.
It's almost like she's saying, I'm charting my own course,
Yes.
and I'm not afraid to sail into uncharted waters, even if it means defying societal expectations.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful message, especially for women, even today.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why Dickinson's work continues to resonate with readers, especially those who identify as feminists. She offers this model of female empowerment, of intellectual and artistic freedom, of refusing to be confined by the limitations imposed by society.
I think what's so compelling about Dickinson is that she's not just a poet, she's a cultural icon. She represents his spirit of individuality, of nonconformity, of daring to be different.
And that spirit, that willingness to embrace the complexities of life and death, of love and loss, of the self and the world around us,
Yeah.
that's what makes her work so enduring and relevant, even in the 21st century.
So while Dickinson may have lived this quiet, secluded life in 19th century America, her voice continues to echo loudly in the halls of modern culture, inspiring artists, musicians, filmmakers, and thinkers across generations.
And that's a testament to the power of her words, her vision, and her unwavering commitment to expressing the truth of her own experience, no matter how unconventional or challenging it might have seemed at the time.
Okay, Lit Nerds, that brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Emily Dickinson.
We've delved into her unique writing style, her exploration of complex themes like death, love, and the self, and her connection to both Victorian-era sensibilities and modern subcultures like the goth movement.
But there's still so much more to explore. In part 3, we'll take a closer look at some specific examples of Dickinson's influence on modern media and music, and we'll examine how her legacy continues to shape our cultural landscape.
Welcome back, Lit Nerds. We're wrapping up our Emily Dickinson deep dive by exploring her lasting impact on modern media and music.
It's amazing to think how a poet who lived such a solitary life
Right.
has become such a powerful force in contemporary culture.
It really is. It's like her poetry has this uncanny ability to transcend.
Time and place and speak to something deep within us, no matter when or where we live.
I think one of the things that makes Dickinson's influence so fascinating is how it kind of pops up in these unexpected places.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, her connection to the goth subculture.
Yes. We talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But I'm still so intrigued by it.
Mhm.
It's like she was a proto-goth without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
What are some specific examples of how her work has resonated with goth artists and musicians?
Well, one really striking example is the band The Mission.
Okay.
Their song Severina actually incorporates lines directly from Dickinson's poem.
Wow.
I heard a fly buzz when I died. It's haunting and beautiful the way they kind of weave her words into their music.
So it's not just a vague inspiration. They're
Yeah.
directly engaging with her poetry.
Yeah, they are.
That's fascinating.
And it goes beyond The Mission. Many goth bands, like Bauhaus, for example, explore similar themes of existential dread and the fragility of life that we also find in Dickinson's work. And their music, that dark atmospheric sound, it creates this sonic landscape that I think really echoes the emotional intensity of her poems.
And then there's Susie and the Banshees
Yes.
with their dramatic stage presence and those haunting melodies.
Oh.
It's like they're channeling that same gothic sensibility that we find in so much of Dickinson's poetry.
Precisely. And, even though they might not quote her directly, you can definitely hear those echoes of Dickinson's themes in the lyrics of bands like The Cure, songs full of longing, heartbreak, and that yearning for connection.
Mm-hmm.
They resonate with those same emotions she explored so beautifully.
It's incredible how her work written back in the 19th century can still speak so powerfully to a 21st century subculture like goth.
It really is. And I think that speaks to the timelessness of her themes,
Yeah.
Love, loss, the search for meaning, the desire to break free from those societal constraints. These are human experiences that resonate across generations and across those cultural boundaries.
Absolutely. And those themes find a really powerful expression in modern media adaptations of her life and work as well.
They do.
We mentioned A Quiet Passion and the Apple TV Plus series Dickinson earlier.
Yes.
It's remarkable how two such different interpretations can both capture something so essential about Dickinson's character and her poetry.
Absolutely. A Quiet Passion offers that more traditional, historically grounded portrayal, focusing on Dickinson's internal struggles and her complex relationship with her family and society.
Yeah, and then Dickinson, with its modern soundtrack and almost anachronistic dialogue, presents a more playful and rebellious interpretation, highlighting her wit, her intelligence, and her resistance to those limitations placed upon women in the 19th century.
It's fascinating how both approaches manage to resonate with audiences, highlighting different facets of this really complex and multifaceted figure.
Absolutely. And it's not just film and television.
Right.
Dickinson's influence extends to literature as well.
Yeah.
Contemporary authors like Joyce Carol Oates and Billy Collins have directly engaged with her work, drawing inspiration from her unique voice and exploring similar themes in their own writing.
Absolutely. It's like her poetry provides this framework for understanding the human condition, a language for expressing the inexpressible, and her influence even transcends, the world of art and literature.
Right.
Her image and quotes appear everywhere, from social media to merchandise, making her a true cultural icon for our times.
I mean, who hasn't seen that "hope is the thing with feathers" quote? Shared on Instagram or printed on a tote bag. It's become this mantra for resilience and optimism.
It has.
In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
It's remarkable, isn't it? A poet who lived such a secluded life has become this globally recognized figure whose words and image resonate with millions of people.
It's like she's tapped into something universal about the human experience. Those feelings of longing and isolation, the search for meaning, the desire to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Those themes are just as relevant today as they were back in the 19th century.
Exactly. And the fact that her work continues to inspire artists and thinkers of all kinds is just a testament to the enduring power of her vision.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the world of Emily Dickinson, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I hope they'll be inspired to delve deeper into Dickinson's poetry themselves,
Yeah.
to discover the beauty and complexity of her work firsthand. She's a poet who rewards close reading.
Hmm.
She challenges you to think deeply, and she ultimately leaves you with more questions than answers.
Right.
But that's part of her magic, you
Right.
know? She doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions.
Mm.
Instead, she invites us to embrace the complexity of life,
Yeah.
to find beauty in the shadows, and to celebrate the power of the human spirit, to endure,
Yeah.
to create, and to find meaning, even in the face of adversity.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, go forth and explore the world of Emily Dickinson.
Yes.
You won't regret it. She's a poet for all time, a voice that continues to whisper to us across the centuries, reminding us of the enduring power of words, the beauty of the human spirit, and the importance of embracing the wild nights of our own hearts.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this Deep Dive Lit Nerds.
Until next time.